holds a position, although her full-time employment is with the social work school down in Norman, where she's now part of the faculty there. But while she was here, and she still does, very active in terms of treating folks with chronic health conditions. For a long time, she and Carrie did the pain management group here in the department. One of her loves is IEPA. She'll explain to you what that is, but interdisciplinary education and training for professionals, and she's been involved in that for a long, long time. She worked for us quite a bit over in the cancer center and specialized treating folks with cancer. And one of the few folks that has a clinical social work oncology certification. So she got her bachelor's degree in psychology at the University of Central Florida, her master's, University of Oklahoma. She's currently pursuing and should be just a few months away from wrapping up her doctorate in social work for University of Tennessee. So we're glad you're here and you're with us, Raina. So I will be quiet and turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I don't think my bio has been updated. So thank you, Dr. Brand. That was, yeah, so now I'm currently, it's very good. Wait, let me roll all that back. It is very good to see you guys' faces again. I'm really glad to be here and get to talk to you all again. And just kind of have a conversation about how we can use mindfulness in substance abuse treatment and get a little background and history on how it came to be and the different ways that we approach mindfulness and treatment in general. But yeah, I'm really glad to be here. I'm glad that he mentioned, that next talk in harm reduction, because that's a lot of what, mindfulness can be used for. Like he said, I am at the I'm at the School of Social Work now, and I'm a full-time instructor. You can still reach me at my previous email, and I'll drop that in the chat if you guys have any questions or would like a copy of this presentation that I'm giving today. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. There we go. Hopefully you all can see my whole presentation now. And Dr. Brand is right. I will finish my doctorate in May. Yay. Really looking forward to that. So today, our topic is mindfulness and substance abuse treatment. Really what I wanted to do here was give a general overview. We're not going to go through exact steps but I think you guys know that in about an hour, it would be hard for me to completely educate you all on treatment models, but I do want to go over this information because I think it's really helpful to have that additional tool in your toolkit. And again, in this presentation, lots of times instead of including like scholarly references, though there's a few of those, I have linked information on the web that's readily accessible to you all, because I know like a lot of our providers, you may not necessarily have means to go back and pull up these articles. Some of them aren't always open access. So where I could, I made sure and provide information that you all could look at again later, rather than, beg and borrow library access. Because I think that's important that you have access to a lot of these things that we see now that you can get to later. So our first objective, we're just going to go over a brief history, not necessarily a linear history, but talk about all the different conceptualizations of mindfulness in healthcare and in substance treatment. There's many different camps, if you will, of mindfulness and how they conceptualize that it works within that mindfulness larger umbrella. So I think talking about, because sometimes some of these orientations can seem like wholly different theories. And if you're just coming into this mindfulness treatment or mindfulness activities. Sometimes it can be a little confusing because some of the different camps, if you will, look at outcomes a little bit differently. So we're going to go over that briefly. Our second objective is that we just really want to nail down and look at that behavioral model of relapse. I find this is, we talk about treatment, we talk about, in intensive treatment, but then how do people manage cravings and that in the moment, in the behavioral model of that. So then we can help educate our patients and then help them manage those cravings in the moment, which we all know is a huge consideration when we talk about relapse prevention. And then our third objective, oh, haha, that's funny. I didn't get in that last objective. I see my stock information there. But our last objective is just we're going to go over a few of the mindfulness practices that are used in chemical dependency or substance abuse. This little last piece in my slide that I didn't get in, that's what happens when you're a slacker. when you're in school and working, that's what happens. You have a little bit of cognitive load there, and sometimes you forget things. So I ask your forgiveness and your patience. Okay, so very brief history here, or again, not history, it's not linear, but we're going to talk about the different areas of mindfulness within in healthcare and in substance abuse treatment. One of the models, the one that I am primarily trained in as a mindfulness practitioner, is mind-body medicine. And this area, this camp, is mainly under the umbrella of the Benson Institute at Harvard. He's a physician. He very much conceptualizes this through the nervous system, and specifically our autonomic nervous system. And so he promotes mindfulness as a way to help balance the two sides of your autonomic nervous system, so the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And a lot of the literature or people who follow along in this camp will talk about balancing out the two sides. This is also something that we hear about in many of the other conceptualizations, but there isn't as much focus on the idea that the processes originate in the brain. So example for this particular model, we're looking at, it is mind-body medicine and is the connection between how you interpret things that then sets forth a series of processes in your body. Like I said, this is the model that I have been trained under and that you'll see a lot of medical providers operate under. I know in palliative care, we use a lot of mind-body medicine techniques, or, understand mindfulness from this particular approach. Something that as I was learning about mindfulness and about the different approaches that then sort of confused me because it overlaps, but there's a little bit different focus, is polyvagal theory. So if you're not familiar with that, the polyvagal theory is about a nerve that runs in connection, that is a part of the autonomic nervous system, that sends signals from your amygdala, where you is part of that fight or flight system that we talk about in mind-body medicine. But it also, there are some separate components of it. A lot of the times when you hear people talk about mind-body medicine or polyvagal theory, they'll overlap some pieces and talk about flight or fright systems, or freezing, and how one or the other of these systems direct it. So for example, in polyvagal theory, this was created by Stephen Porges, and I've listed his website there, so you can go back and take a reference or take a look at it. A lot of this is it seems like in the literature, is directed by the polyvagal nerve. And they talk about where it's out in the body and how it relates to other systems. Whereas mind-body medicine focuses on specifically how your mind interprets the threat and then causes action. There's a little bit of nuance of difference there, but when you look at everything neurobiologically, it is very much true. The polyvagal nerve is part of the autonomic system and all connects. So then we have our third wave therapies. So you have CBT or mindfulness-based CBT, ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, and DBT, which is dialectical behavior therapy. So they all incorporate or utilize some type of mindfulness in their approach. They all conceptualize it a little bit differently, but they don't find practitioners of these several different therapies using some part or another of mind-body medicine or polyvagal theory, or have combined the two. Because very honestly, like learning about how the neurobiology works and what the exact process is kind of confusing. It's a very overwhelming thing to learn all of the processes and all of the neurology and all of the, like I said, neurobiological that connects all of these. And then now more recently, it's not new, but it is gaining traction within different therapeutic areas, and that's called somatic experiencing. And that, Peter Levine is credited very much with that particular orientation. Somatic experiencing is a little bit different. I would say it's on the different in its orientation, in that if you look at mind-body medicine, it is 100% medical model. It talks about neurotransmitters and how they influence emotions and how we use mindfulness techniques to help mitigate the actions of those neurotransmitters. That's it in a very short, kind of compact square. Whereas somatic experiencing sometimes is used by more spiritual practitioners, or practitioners, you may hear words like energy and vibrations. It is a very different approach to some of the same mechanisms. While somatic experiencing does talk about these body processes, there is more of a focus on the physical self, and they will talk about these operations as happening in the body, specifically without cognitive influence. And so somatic experiencing states that there's not a lot to do with the brain at all in this process, that it is just a function of the body. And this particular approach has become very popular within trauma. If any of you treat trauma or understand or know about some of the newer theories within trauma, and it is listed as gaining evidence. It is not necessarily considered a 100% evidence-based theory or practice, but it is based on a lot of what we see in mind-body medicine theories, as well as polyvagal theory. So you have this huge spectrum. Is the point of this, is that you have this huge spectrum of how people approach mindfulness as something that is 100% medical model, biological, and then you have people who incorporate bits of spiritual practice, much like the people we learned meditation from in Buddhist practices. So there's this huge spectrum, but I say that because I feel like that's very important as we approach our patients, that some of these models, and we may have patients who want spiritual involvement, and that's very important. And then also we have patients who are like, I don't want any woo-woo, right? who are on the completely opposite end. But the mechanisms of mindfulness are pretty much agreed upon within all of these different areas. So now that we have, that established, that there is some agreement with all of these, but you may find different approaches by different presenters and different scholars within the field on how mindfulness works. But like I said, one of the things is that mindfulness works is sort of the connection that we want to come to. There's a lot of evidence that the act of meditation or mindfulness, both formal and informal practices, has an effect on the body that helps you relax, that helps you calm down. It activates the prefrontal cortex, creates connections in the brain that would not have been there, or strengthens connections in the brain that would not have been there otherwise without these practices. So you have this wide variety of people believe how you come to get there, but then a lot of the practices of mindfulness themselves are very similar. Though you will have camps of people who have a spiritual aspect to their mindfulness practice, but also then there's lots of people who have mindfulness practices that are very secular. So I say that because now we have choices. We have choices for our patients who need different things. And I think that is a magical, fantastic thing in substance abuse treatment. I think it's important to have all those options. So, oh, how did I get all the way to 9? Look at that. Let's go back. So now we're going to talk about the relapse cycle and craving cycle and how this works. So we have, of course, always within the person, we have vulnerabilities and predispositional factors. We know these as genetic risks. You guys are, I love talking to this group because you all have a lot of information already. You all have a ton of information from your years and years of practice. And you all know a lot about your patients. So you guys know that there are many things that go into individuals who become addicted, who become dependent on chemicals, right? And a lot of these are, genetic factors, they're situational factors, they're, you can have addiction in 2 different people and have a variety of reasons they came to it. But so you take all these factors into account, in the individual. So you have the trigger, you have the thing that the emotional event, the crisis, the visual input that creates this idea of craving, that makes the brain remember the need for release is the substance. So let me walk back a step. I kind of got ahead of myself there. So you have the trigger, and then you have the discomfort and the dissatisfaction that comes from the trigger. You have the inability to hold that emotion, that very strong emotion that comes from the trigger, and the need to escape that feeling. And as you all know, sometimes it can be something extremely minor that, results in this very strong emotion. It can be an imagined slight. It can be the idea that they disappointed someone, or, that trigger can be a lot of different things. Sometimes for a lot of patients in long-term recovery can be something really serious that, that there is the belief that the upset absolutely belongs there, and it does. So, but the main idea is the inability to hold or keep this discomfort and dissatisfaction, which that negative emotion and that negative concept leads to craving. That, brings about old patterns, old behaviors and habits in the mind that says, hey, I feel bad. Now, what solves this? And so because there's a history or a past of using maladaptive sources to manage that emotion, then that leads to substance abuse or substance use again, which leads to craving, right? Which then reinforces behaviorally that cycle. And you go back from substance use to craving, potentially, right? But also that use then reinforces and makes again happen that discomfort and dissatisfaction. You all see it so many times with your patients. You have the craving, you use the substance, and now you have failed. Now there's a little bit of thought over that emotion, and then why did I ruin all my progress with the use? And then you feel that fear, or the individual feels that fear, hopelessness, guilt, and shame. But the thing to remember is that this process is automatic. It's not a conscious step from trigger to discomfort to craving to substance use. That is one singular automatic process. And the idea of mindfulness is that we can help interrupt that. As with other therapeutic approaches, like behavioral or and this is based on that, and cognitive, it is really about interrupting that automatic process. Now, with different therapeutic approaches, they may focus on interrupting the process in one or the other area. The idea with mindfulness-based approaches is that some of the different approaches interrupt this at different points in the cycle. And also it's important to note, like I have on my slide here, that the substance use does provide a temporary alleviation. And that is one major part of the behavioral cycle of addiction, is that you get that temporary alleviation from those negative feelings. So let's go to the next slide. And so again, this is also about, hopefully what we want out of mindfulness-based treatments is to help interrupt the craving, the part of craving. And you have all of these factors that go into craving that are very physical, that are very somatic, if you will. And there is the cognitive piece, like thought. There is, but you have these sensations within your body when you experience the craving. You all have heard our patients and our clients talk a lot about what those sensations are, like the desire and the overwhelming need to consume. And then that follows emotion. There's a lot of debate within our fields about, which comes first, the emotion or the physical response. Is it the emotion that causes the sensation, the physical sensation, or is it the physical sensation that causes the emotion? But all of these are all part of, the craving. And you get that immediate urge to react. But also, again, just like the other, I was going to say other slide, demonstrated, you also have these underlying needs, like, there was the trigger or the crisis that instituted, that led to this craving. And so one of the theorized actions of mindfulness in interrupting this cycle is that it breaks that negative reinforcement, but also the practice of meditation reinforces curiosity and kindness, and that and the lack of judgment, and the ability to feel the emotion without necessarily bringing about the negative cognitions of fear and guilt and shame. So instead of making the negative reinforcement of the cycle of, using the substance again, is that we are creating a positive reinforcement, a non-judgmental awareness of the feeling, and then the ability to take a different action rather than the old negative maladaptive one. So in that, there are several different researched modalities that specifically use mindfulness focused, that are mindfulness focused, that have some component and have been well researched and have shown great improvements with our with patients who have addictions. So mindfulness-based relapse prevention is an offshoot of mindfulness-based stress reduction, as well as mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. It has a fusion of mindfulness practices along with cognitive and behavioral approaches. It is highly structured. It is not, it's not just a random inclusion of mindfulness-based practices here and there, but it is an 8-week structured program where that's required daily practice as they go through the 8-week structured program. And the regulation of the practice is also, I was going to say the regulation of the practice is highly regulated. And that's a little redundant, but true. So the therapists themselves, it is required that they have their own, not just meditation practice, but daily meditation practice. And in this, it includes both formal, and this is important to note, it includes both formal and informal meditation practices. So formal practices would be things like the raisin experiment, or using the raisin mindfulness approach. Approach isn't the right word, but skill, that's not the right word either. It's okay, guys, it's Friday. So this, the formal exercise, that's the word I'm looking for. So it includes the formal exercise of, the raisin exercise. And if you're not familiar with this, it is a scripted, you look at the raisin, you eat the raisin, but also there's another practice where, you're imagining the raisin in a loaf of bread. And these are scripted, and there are lots of examples on the internet of different ways that people utilize this formal practice. There are other, leaves on a stream, the formal practice where you imagining that you're sitting next to the stream and each of your thoughts are leaves that fall down and then you let them float away. The misconception a lot of the times in mindfulness practices when we talk about learning how to meditate or learning how to do mindfulness practices is that you are to focus on keeping your thoughts in a line. And really, within mindfulness practice, that is not the goal at all. Within mindfulness practice, the goal is to learn, not positive self-regard, but that's kind of true, is to learn how to redirect your thoughts. So the actual action is like not, keeping your thoughts locked down in a tight cage and then they can't come outside of that cage. But the practice of meditation is very much about recognizing when the fox has escaped and corralling it back into the den. Or a lot of the times we'll use the example of trains at a station. It is very natural for the mind to wander. That's what the mind does. The mind, goes here and there, it flits. The mind is literally an organ that was made to produce thoughts. I had one particular professor who refers to it as excretes. If you think of your mind as an organ, literally all it does excretes thoughts all the time. We all joke about ADHD, or we joke about getting distracted or focused in this highly technological area, or not area, but era. And so, but the idea is that even in other areas, that's what our brain does, is it just produces thoughts. So the focus of meditation is not to corral those, but to understand when the mind wanders, and then the ability to bring it back. So using both formal and informal practices helps an individual learn this skill. It also helps train your cognition in order to not negatively approach the flitting of the thought somewhere else, but having a non-judgmental awareness of when the thought goes, and then you gently bring it back. And that is the practice, the true practice of meditation. Your thoughts will always wander. Now, as you learn to develop the skill through meditation, you will get much better at it. And then you're not only growing the practice of the out and back, the training and learning to focus your attention on what you want to focus it on, but you're also practicing non-judgmental cognition, right? You are learning to identify like when something has happened, and then use non-judgmental awareness to recognize that it's happened. And so this is part of one of the theorized theories of why we believe that mindfulness works very well in, to help with cravings, and as a key part of relapse prevention. Because as you can see, when we talk about non-judgmental awareness, and let me go back to the prior slide there, and we're talking about, approaching that craving with kindness and curiosity, instead of going back to this formal relapse cycle where we have the substance abuse that then causes fear, hopelessness, guilt, and shame. And then you feel that intense discomfort and dissatisfaction, so that then you experience the craving again. So if we apply mindfulness-based interventions, at this part where we feel this, at either the trigger, the discomfort or dissatisfaction, or the point where one is experiencing the craving, then the hope is that if we can urge surf or have a formal practice through this craving, we've broken the automatic process and then prevented relapse or prevented another period of use. Let me go back. And again, this resulting in kindness and curiosity is a very large part of why we think mindfulness works in relapse prevention, because it is an ongoing practiced process of learning how to recognize yourself with kindness, automatic actions, i.e. like your thought going out and back. And then once you've, built that muscle, then you have it available for lots of different parts in your, lots of different areas in your life. And so then you have that reason, versus the urge surfing. And then I want to talk real briefly about the urge surfing. So urge surfing, you may be familiar with it as part of, just the idea that, you feel the urge and you go along with it. But there are lots of mindfulness-based activities within, that you can find on the internet. And if you need some resources, I can get you guys a resource sheet after the presentation, how to help patients learn how to urge surf. And when we talk about urge surfing, if you're not familiar with it, or you want to know like specifically in mindfulness based, so urge surfing is the idea that you get this craving, and that you feel that immediate need to use. And so instead of feeling that negative emotional cycle, that the individual stops and then instead of trying to suppress the emotion of the urge or the craving or put it out of their mind or ignore it, is that they investigate it, is that you surf it like, like you would a surfboard on a wave. And you ride the urge rather than following it through to its ultimate conclusion, and then going back to your substance of choice. And so urge surfing is considered an informal meditation type because it's not the same for everybody. There's not an exact practice or a script to follow. You are following something in the moment. Other informal meditation types include active exercises like mindfulness, taking mindfulness walk. An example of mindfulness walking would be, simply in encouraging your patients to take a walk, and then instead of taking music or something to listen to, they can, focus on the sounds or events that happen on the walk. But the idea is to focus on physical sensations of the walk instead of your mental sensations. And that's considered an informal practice because, again, you're using spontaneous inputs from outside rather than something scripted. And that's just the main difference between formal and informal. But again, I said all of that as a subcomponent of talking about mindfulness-based relapse prevention as its own specific thing. So going back to that, we have coping strategies. And this is a huge part of, the 8-week courses of mindfulness-based relapse prevention. Because again, we all know that like helping to predict what's going to go wrong and when, but also coping strategies that one uses emotionally. And I won't go into the whole, 8-week mindfulness space or what that's scripted like, but I did want to introduce you to a new something called mindfulness-oriented recovery enhancement, and it's called MORE. And this is also a mindfulness-based relapse prevention group. It's also typically run in a group. And the idea is it focuses on these 3 areas. This has a lot of scientific backing and a lot of research behind it, and is very mindfulness oriented. So this mindfulness is, in general, the way that it's theorized to work. And I have the link for you there at the bottom where you can learn more. And mindfulness, it's theorized that we promote awareness so that you understand when you're having a trigger or an emotion or something that starts that automatic cycle that becomes hard to break. So once you have trained this awareness through mindfulness, by becoming aware of the feelings that you have in your body and those emotions, like let's go back to, like this particular slide. So, in this particular model, it's theorized that through mindfulness, you are learning to identify all of these things as cravings as they occur, rather than going in the automatic process directly from, like in this one, from craving to substance use. So you are learning to recognize that you're having a craving by identifying one of these things, however it occurs first for yourself, and then interrupting the cycle before you're under an avalanche of all of them. So then it breaks that cycle. But also, because you have been practicing mindfulness and you have been a part of this, you then can respond with curiosity and kindness. So you also break that negative, the fear, the hopelessness, and guilt and shame. So the idea amongst both of these is that you are using mindfulness to train several things that individuals need in order to break the craving cycle. So back to the MORE model. So you have the promotes awareness of all of those mechanisms that I mentioned, but also it focuses on reappraisal. And reappraisal, we talk about this cognitively, and we talk about this in a lot of different models, but it allows you to learn how to reframe or take your thoughts and interpret them in a different way. In a lot of, in ACT and in DBT and in a lot of the different modalities, we talk about this in different ways, but really it's the ability to be flexible so that when you have these really rigid negative thoughts about your experiences that causes the negative emotion, that then causes the avalanche of other feelings, so that then you end up in an episode of substance use. This reappraisal allows you to break that ongoing cycle. And then savoring, this really brings in another aspect of mindfulness that is starting to be incorporated more. Again, it's that it's not enough to break the negative cognition cycle, but you also need to build the skills of positive, of positive interpretation, of looking at the potentially good things or potentially bright things in your life, that it's not just good enough to stop being negative Nancy, right? Or to stop seeing the negative tree, but that you have to find a way to interpret the world through a different lens. So you have the savoring. This also, when we talk about substance use, helps replace the negative rewarding experiences, right? Like negative reinforcement, with allowing people to identify things that are naturally rewarding. And you guys may be familiar with this and use this in your own practice now. We tell, like, what is it that you enjoy? We naturally lead people to engage in things that they have value in, but by reminding them, by taking the time to cognitively identify these savoring experiences, and then, and giving them this name of savoring, it allows them to have these 3 basic principles that they can use at any place and any time. So now you may be asking me, okay, Raina, you have introduced, the history and the cycle, but why are you telling me about these things? Because I am not going to be certified in mindfulness-based relapse prevention anytime soon. And that's true. These are all, but you can, in your everyday practice, use a lot of mindfulness-based exercises, because again, the point of mindfulness is not necessarily that there's all of these different camps, though that's true. It's that we all know through all of this research that these mindfulness-based activities can be taken and used in lots of different places with decent success. So because we know that through meditation and mindfulness, it does increase positive regard for self through the practice. We do know that through these mindfulness practices, it allows people to train their attention and focus, so that if they come upon a negative emotion, that they can learn to sit with the negative emotion and learn that it doesn't overwhelm them or ruin the moment, or it also allows them to recognize that that the negative emotion may be from that cycle, that negative appraisal. And so that then they can learn how to, at the moment of negative appraisal, turn it into a potentially positive appraisal, or even a neutral appraisal, rather than it being a cascade of negative things. So it is very useful for you all as practitioners to learn, how to use these mindfulness-based bits and pieces within your regular practice. I know we have this negative idea of being eclectic therapists, and that's true. However, we do have a lot of evidence that shows when you take these bits of mindfulness into your substance use practice, it works. So what does it mean? Well, we know that a lot of these methods and mindfulness-based practices decrease rates of substance use after inpatient or intensive outpatient programs. They also reduce the effects of all of those relapse risk factors. So if you have a patient who's having a particularly difficult time with other, with other comorbidities, or has a particularly not just stressful job. I think we all have stressful jobs during COVID, but a particularly difficult social situation. It also increases acceptance and non-judgment, which sometimes is really hard to attack from a cognitive standpoint. We can work with our cognitive behavioral techniques and teach people how to think in different ways. But sometimes when you approach that with reasoning, people have a really great way of justifying why they're terrible people, despite a lot of the evidence. But when you help them learn how to train their attention and focus as a separate skill, that helps bolster the activity of learning how to reframe other cognitive judgments. Also, it helps decrease negative affect. So when we talk about, you're not just training someone with these mindfulness practices to to love themselves. You're not just focusing on this one part, or teaching them not to think negatively about themselves, but mindfulness-based practices and substance use treatment also decrease negative emotions in general. And then this decreases problematic substance use and behaviors as a whole. It's like, I think of it sometimes, we teach very specific skills for specific reasons. So if somebody's having issues with anxiety and that's one of their triggers for substance use, we may teach them how to ground themselves, or we may teach them, to count door handles in the office clinic, because what we're doing is that's a way to teach them to focus on something else other than the anxiety. Well, if someone starts up, it doesn't mean, we want it to be daily, like that's the goal. But even some practice has shown to be efficacious in learning how to direct that attention away when they want to. So then we know through that it will decrease other problematic substance use behaviors. So irritability, anxiety, and we all know that a lot of the times through many years of this cycle, people have a very negative self-appraisal. And through, building these skills, through working out, what we do is we help them develop that very curiousness and non-judgmental awareness, which, it's very interesting we say that, but that is highly meaningful to someone who has experienced years of negative appraisal and has a really difficult time approaching that. And so that's kind of why I like it, because it doesn't necessarily rely on reasoning that may be really difficult to get your foot in the door, but it's just another tool for us to be able to use and to give to our patients so that they can, utilize everything that's available to them. So options, what does this mean for practitioners in Oklahoma City? Well, some of you may be aware, I think we've talked about this at some of our previous CD seminars, but I wanted to remind you is that we do have the Buddhist Recovery Network, and they do have meetings here in Oklahoma. So if you have patients who are like, oh, I just can't handle AA, but who want some other type of spiritual practice rather than that traditional, or even people who are atheist or agnostic, there is not anything particularly forced upon our patients in this particular model. They can choose how they want to participate in those moments. And the Buddhist Recovery Network, they're a great program here in the Oklahoma City area, and they operate a lot on these mindfulness techniques. There's also several Buddhist temples here in the area, and one of them pre-COVID used to offer trainings for new individuals. I don't think they have started back up yet, but that's something to put on your radar for when they do. And again, because this is all about having options for our different folks, right? Because that very first slide, right, which was the vulnerabilities and predispositional factors are all very different in all of our patients. So making sure we address that part of the mechanism as well. And so, yeah, so I thought I had it done, but I could not find it to send it out before, but I'll make sure and, it gets out to you afterwards. So resources for just like very simple mindfulness activities that you can incorporate into your practice. If you have patients that are interested in, here in Oklahoma, let's be honest, that, I very rarely have people who walk in and say, hey, Rain, I'm so interested in learning a meditation practice. But this is something that a lot of people are more open to learning about than in previous years. And we do also have this scientific model that shows why mindfulness is useful. In a particular setting. But I will say that two things to remember about the practice is that meditation is not about learning to put your thoughts in a metal cage and keep them still. It is very much about the practice of letting it go or seeing it go and then it coming back. And also practice. Just like with a lot of our, I think all therapists were like, you have to practice this. You can't just talk to me for an hour and go out and come back, or you just can't go to your IOP program and then return as if everything is fine. All of these require practice, but I think a really great selling point of mindfulness practice is that you can start at 15 to 20 minutes a day and it can be separated out. So you can have them practice 10 minutes of eating their cereal very mindfully in the morning. It is a very great way to help people meet themselves where they are. And if you introduce a lot of these informal practices that might encourage them, it's about harm reduction, right? And it is about learning how to do this on a daily basis in the moment rather than for longer term success. So now that you all have suffered through me prattling on for an hour, do any of you, that's the end of my presentation. Let me stop share. So do any of you have any questions or anything that I can clarify about my long-winded prattling that may be able to help you with thoughts or questions that you had about the presentation today? I like you guys a lot. We can just like wave and talk.
Well, right now, I will say that thing is, what you said about, to practice this effectively, you got to have to teach it or to use it in your clinical work, you have to have a pretty active and practice yourself. And I would just say that is definitely the case.
Oh, absolutely. But that doesn't keep us you have to start your practice somewhere, right? And so in order to incorporate, pieces of mindfulness into your own, treatment it doesn't mean that you have to be meditating for an hour every morning, right? Practice.
No, most people can't meditate or anytime. Yeah, I just found it real helpful. When I started, I went over to the Buddha temple over there on Anderson Road and spent about 18 months, 2 years or something, going over and visit with them, doing the stuff, once or twice a week. And then found that really helpful to get kind of an experiential understanding of what was going on and how it really worked. And we, back then they had you do walking meditations and like that. And then spent some time up at Harvard at the Benson Institute, and then spent some, you didn't mention it, but spent some time over at UMass with John Kabat-Zinn and some of his stuff. So having that experience of actually doing it, as you're learning about the research and learn how to do it and implement it with patients, really does come in handy, I've found.
Oh, absolutely. And so for those things like, the mindfulness-based recovery prevention, that's why that is, like very much formal. And I think that we, a lot of us going into it have a misconception of what, meditation practice is, but you have to start somewhere, right?
Yep.
You have to begin your practices and incorporate it, and it's okay to like snowball all that in. And yes, so for the people who are certified, they do have these practices, but making these options available for our patients absolutely doesn't mean, that the average provider has to have the 100% formal meditation, but also, if you want to learn more or get more into this, it is very important to have that experience yourself as you become a mindfulness-based provider. And then, oh, I'm sorry, I see your screen name is Alexander. See, Alexander, you said, where can you find more information on the polyvagal theory? I have on my slides that we'll send out to you is, Stephen Porges. He's the one, like I said, who's credited with the polyvagal theory, and his website is really robust. And he talks a lot about how he, where he originally developed the idea and how he incorporates it along with his specific slant on it. But there's a lot of info and not a lot of bad info out there on polyvagal theory, but that I think that's a good place to start. And then Melissa, you said your mom attends there. Did you mean the Buddhist temple, or what were you referring to? Yeah, okay, yeah. I know I've thought about, I would like to work up to this 10-day retreat. And now I think they'd actually be really nice. But that may be a function of me having been a doctorate student and exhausted. So the idea of going somewhere for 10 days where I don't have to talk or say anything sounds kind of nice. And it's 3:01. So I don't want to keep you all any longer. If you guys don't have any more questions for me, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you all.
Yeah, well, thank you, Raina, for giving us a very good overview of mindfulness and some abuse treatment. So thanks.
Thank you, Raina.
Yes, thank you, Lenore. Good to see you all.
Bye-bye.